Some of the most ruthless, best fighters in the world were being bullied when they were growing up. They were too small to defend themselves. I'm talking champions. Some of the most ruthless conquerors of all time were being bullied. I'm talking guys like Napoleon Bonaparte, who was a short guy who was bullied for his stature. Some of the most successful titans in business were guys that were bullied growing up. Revenge of the Nerds type stuff. They let that fuel and that rage turn them into really successful people. So today we got a question from one of our supporters who's being bullied. His son's getting bullied, and he wants to know how he can deal with it. So let's get into it. Just found out my son's getting bullied at school by this little prick down the street who knows karate. It happened before, and I had a firm talk with dad. I think he meant with his dad, but I digress. And the dad did tell him to stop. Found out the kid didn't. My son is 8, pushing him, knocking out stuff in his hands, etc. First, this is written horribly, by the way. You guys need to tighten up on the grammar. I first thought I was going to beat the fuck out of his dad, which would be extremely easy. But after that thought passed, I figured I would get my son some training. I was bullied as a kid, and it never stopped until I got big. My son's not going to be big for a long time. So I think it's time he learns how to fight. And thus not be afraid. I love BJJ, but he can't learn enough over summer vacation. I was thinking putting him into boxing and wrestling. Gracie Gym teaches a bully class down the street, but I'm not sure if it's worthless. You have any advice? Breaks my heart. His sister told me he had picked flowers for his mom on Mother's Day, and the little fucker knocked it out of his hands, stomped him, and it makes my blood boil. But if I handle for him, it will never stop. If I handle it for him, it will never stop. Still think I'm gonna have a discussion with the dad, but didn't work the first time, so it probably won't work the second time. Yeah, man, that's brutal. It brings me back when I was a kid. I was an immigrant from Africa, and I lived in St. Louis, Missouri, and it was pretty poor, so I had to wear the same clothes, sometimes 2-3 times in the week. So a lot of other kids would just make fun of me for it, and I had to fight a lot because of it. Because they'd say something like African booty scratcher, and then boom, bop, boom, bop. We would just be constantly fighting because I wasn't going, even though I was a skinny kid, I wasn't going to allow people to disrespect me. So I got into a lot of fights. I got beat up a lot. I beat some people up as well, and I didn't know how to fight at all. I had no idea how to fight. So when it comes to bullying, your son doesn't really need to know how to fight. He just needs to know how to defend himself, how to take up for himself, how to stand up for himself. Me as a kid, I didn't know how to fight, but I was like, this isn't going to continue. Boom, we're going to throw hands. All right. But so basically, when you take your son to martial arts, what he's going to learn, he's going to get familiar with combat, and it's going to make him less likely to shell up in a moment where someone's taking something from him and stomping on it and saying, do something about it. And this type of kid is the worst. He's going to karate, learning karate, and then trying to bully kids with the knowledge he's learned from karate. That brings us into Georges St-Pierre. Georges St-Pierre, one of the best fighters of all time, welterweight world champion, one of the most dominant fighters of all time. He was a guy who actually was getting bullied. He started learning Kyokushin karate but he was a guy who was legit getting bullied, beat up. You know, he was a goofy kid. You know, as you can see here, he had a terrible haircut as a kid. Let's take a zoom in on that haircut. You know, he had a horrible haircut as a kid, and you know, he was just like a pretty boy type of kid. So a lot of the other kids, you know, took advantage of that. You know, the ones that were bigger than him, tougher than him, rougher than him, they took advantage of that, and they made him into a beast. They made him into a world champion fighter. You know, this is a common story. You can go one way, you can go the other way. You can shell up and just be scared and run, or you can fight. You know, George St. Pierre was getting beat up, getting bullied. His dad enrolled him into Kyokushin karate to where he got comfortable in combat. Because in the gym, you're gonna get beat up, you're gonna get your ass beat, you know. So if you get beat up here and there, it's not a big deal. When that bully comes to you, you know, you throw hands with him. Even if you lose, you get respect, you know, and that's what it's ultimately about. You know, when it comes to this bullying thing, no one wants their kid being bullied, because when you're getting bullied, no one has respect for you. You know, that bully doesn't have respect for you. And no one wants their kid to grow up to be a pushover or be weak. So that's why everyone needs to learn how to fight, you know. But George St. Pierre, one of the most dominant fighters, one of the most, when he fought, he had a lot of heart, and he was very smart and technical and very proficient, you know. And that fire that turned him into a champion was built when he was getting bullied. Your kid will never forget the time where he picked flowers for his mother on Mother's Day, and another kid took it from him and stomped on it and said, do something about it. And he couldn't do nothing about it in front of his sister. You know, that's humiliation, you know, and that's something that he will never forget. And that's going to fuel him. So if you put him into boxing or wrestling, I prefer wrestling, because, you know, boxing is great, but wrestling, when you pick someone up, slam them down, you know, that's just a different thing. You know, I think he would learn a lot from wrestling, and wrestling is super fun for kids to where they don't really get scared. They're not scared of fighting, because wrestling is something that's very natural for kids, you know. So I would say put him into wrestling, you know. But let's get into GSP's story a little bit more.
Yeah, I've started martial art as a self-defense. I was bullied when I was young, and at the time, I saw it as a very negative experience, and it was. But I realize now that the fact that I was bullied when I was young helped me later on in my life.
Exactly. This thing right here, him being bullied, could be one of the most best things that ever happened to him. It sucks right now, but it's character building. Imagine if you lived your life, you know, and you never faced any adversity. You know, the kid's this is character building. He's not going to be no pushover. He's not going to be weak. He's getting bullied now. He's going to turn him into a beast, you know.
Facing the mental warfare that I had to face in mixed martial art, because it's a very egotistic sport. There's a lot of intimidation when you get into a fight. And I got used to it when I was so young. And we see very often a lot of fighters, they lose their chill. It can make them commit mistakes, but they never worked with me because I had a very strong shield to protect me.
So George St. Pierre, he turned his experience being bullied into a superpower for him. You know, him being bullied as a kid became his ultimate strength when he started fighting. I'm not saying that your kid should start fighting or anything like that, but this could be a very big moment for your kid. You know, your kid is small, he's young. This could really be great for the kid, you know. And I love how the parent said, like, you're going to let the kid handle it himself so he can learn. There's too many helicopter parents, there's too many things like that. No, if you're being bullied, you do have to address it yourself. Your job as a parent is just to give the kid the tools and the confidence he needs to address the situation himself, you know. And George St. Pierre, from him, that's crazy. He's a world champion fighter, great fighter. right? He's a beast, but in his mind, he's always still the kid that was being bullied. You know, the small kid that was being bullied, getting pushed around. You know, and when you go out there, you know, right now in the future, right now it's just some kid bullying him, taking his flowers. But in the future, it's going to be business. You know, in the future, it's going to be, you know, someone trying to take your girl. In the future, it's going to be other things. You know, and right now he's getting that mental toughness and that mental fortitude that's necessary in life. You know, so this is one of the greatest things that could happen to your kid. It sounds crazy, but it really is.
You know, you play hockey, you play soccer, but you do not play fighting. So if I'm fighting you, it's very serious business because the outcome of the fight might affect your well-being or mine.
It's a fact.
For me, right now, training, people ask me, why do you train? You don't have a fight coming up. For me, it's because it's a therapy. Yeah. I believe because
I'll bring it personal. Right? So when I was a kid, basically me, I was a very skinny kid, right? I felt super weak. I wanted to learn how to fight. I wanted to be able to defend myself. I never wanted to feel weak, you know, ever again. You know, all the kids I hung around were older than me, like 3, 4, 5 years older than me. So I was a skinny kid, you know, I was like probably like, let's say 120 pounds, you know, something like that, 120 pounds, 130 pounds, you know, and when I was like in 5th grade, whatever, you know, I was very small. And, you know, when I get into fights, I would just feel kind of helpless because I was just so small and skinny and I didn't know what I was doing. So the 8th grade kid, you know, would win in the fight, you know, and I just had a fire in me. Like, I want to learn how to fight. I got to learn how to fight. So I went on YouTube and started looking up every single thing about fighting. And then I started running around the block every day, running miles and miles and miles. And then I started doing push-ups every day. Essentially, I was doing like a one-punch man training regimen on my own. Because I was like, it's never going to happen again. I'm going to work really hard and build myself up so it never happens again. And when the fights would happen, you know, when the situations would happen, I remember one time in high school, I got suspended because, you know, one of the older kids came up behind me and like grabbed me and like was trying to lift me up and was like trying to like, he was trying to play me, you know what I'm saying? Trying to be like, trying to punk me. You know, I took my bag off and I started throwing hands on him right away because this dude was known as a knockout artist. He beats people up, blah, blah, blah. And he's trying to come up behind me and lift me up. I took my bag off and I started throwing on him. The whole school was there, saw the fight. And I threw a couple big shots on him. And I was slipping punches and getting in there with him. And basically all the training I had done on my own had built me up to that moment. You know, and the kid never, ever, ever came across me again with nothing crazy like that ever again. So these moments of learning how to fight and gaining the confidence go a long way. You know, you don't ever want to go into a room and feel weak as a man. You know what I'm saying? And even if you are the weakest person in that room, you should still be able to grab your balls and still be able to stand on your own 2 feet.
As I was bullied when I was young, it left a scar in my mind. And it might sound crazy to most of people because most of them cannot relate to that, but because when I was young, I got bullied so much, I got humiliated so much. And sometimes physical damage is not as bad as emotional damage, and that's what happened to me. So I need to train. I remember even sometimes when I'm not in shape or I got an injury, I don't feel as confident as I am. And I know I would never get probably beat up because, you know, I'm an adult now, but I don't know, it's inside my head.
You know, that's the thing. Like, this is gonna stay with your kid forever. You know, this is gonna stay with your kid forever. But honestly, it's one of the best gifts your kid could ever get, because if he lives a little comfortable, soft ass life, he's gonna be a weak adult. So, you know, some of the best fighters, John Jones, for example, You know, he was always a smaller kid, skinny kid growing up. And obviously he became one of the best fighters ever in history, right? So this is the fire your kid is going to get from remembering these moments, and you get him in martial arts, you teach him how to fight, you know, you get him in competition. It's going to really, he's never going to be a victim again. You know what I'm saying? You're not creating a victim here. You're creating a strong individual. And the best thing you could do is get him in the gym, teach him how to fight, get him to learn how to fight, get him into wrestling, get him into boxing, kickboxing. I would say wrestling, because wrestling is such a hard, brutal sport that he's going to get extremely tough. So now we're going to go into a few different champions who were bullied and stuff like that. And a lot of time these bullies, because when you're a bully, you're a weak person. You're looking for a weaker victim. Like, you're training martial arts, knowing other people aren't training, and you're trying to get into an altercation with them to use the martial arts. That's what a weak person does. You know, that's not what a strong person does. So as these bullies grow up, usually in life, it doesn't play out well for them. And George St. Pierre actually had a story of his childhood bully, how things played out in the future.
In the evening, I see a tall guy coming at me, and he begged for money. Put down my window. This guy, I swear it's true story, is the guy that used to bully me in school.
Whoa.
I say, I don't want to say his name, but I say, hey, wait a second. I park the car, go talk to him. I say, what the hell are you doing here, man? He's like, and he thought I would be angry, because when he see me, he saw his reaction, like shoot, like now I'm world champion, you know,
right.
like I can beat him up, you know.
Right.
Back in the day, he was like 3 years older than me, was bigger, he was beating me up in the bus, this guy. Now he see me, he's like kind of a scare. I get out of my car, you don't know.
It's funny how the cards play out. It's funny how things change.
Oh, you don't know if you should run or not. So I go to him, I say, what you do here, man? He's like, he's like, yeah, I know, but things doesn't go well for me, you know. I was like, all right. It's like, man, you're a tall guy, you're good looking. He's like, what you doing here, man? It's like, I give him what I have left on me, you know. Like, I don't remember, like 100 something, you know. I give him. I say, get out of here, man. It's like, you're full of potential.
You know, and so the guy who used to bully him now is the homeless guy in the street, and he's a multi-millionaire, professional world champion fighter. You know what I'm saying? It's wild, man. It's wild how this cards play out. The guy bullying him actually gave him an incredible gift, you know, because he gave him grit. You know, he gave him adversity. So it was an incredible gift. So your son getting bullied right now at the age of 8 years old it might suck right now, but it really is a gift, you know. And then that brings us into Rose Namajunas. Rose Namajunas, obviously one of the best fighters in the UFC history, especially for women. You know, she grew up in a real rough environment, faced a lot of trauma, a lot of abuse, and was bullied, you know, and she became, with the mental resilience that she had going through all that growing up, turned her into a 2-time UFC strawweight champion, and she still competes to this day. One of the best women fighters of all time. You know, those scars turn you into a beast, you know, and it doesn't just have to be in fighting. You could turn into a beast in many different ways through many different things. You know, Ronda Rousey, obviously one of the most successful MMA fighters ever. You know, she dealt with social anxiety and bullying growing up because she had a stutter growing up as a kid. So she was ruthlessly bullied. And she started training judo, became a judo Olympic medalist. I believe she got the bronze medal, and then switched her career over and became a UFC bantamweight champion and a global icon, and then became one of the top WWE wrestlers in the world and a multimillionaire, you know. And this all started from her social anxiety and her inability to communicate properly as a kid. As a matter of fact, I have her book. It's called My Fight, Your Fight. one of the best books I've ever read, actually. Really inspiring book, and it actually helped me a lot in my competition career, and I still go back and read it to this day to get inspiration and motivation and get my mindset right. Ronda Rousey, you know, one of the, if without the bullying, there's no Ronda Rousey. You know what I'm saying? And next, you know, we have a legend in Mike Tyson. You know, Mike Tyson is also a guy who was bullied ruthlessly growing up. Mike Tyson was created because one of the kids in his neighborhood, Brownsville, New York, took his pet pigeon, ripped its head off, and said, "What are you going to do about it?" And that made Mike Tyson black out and just destroy the guy. And because he was a guy who was timid and scared and would never defend himself. He was pushed to a brink to where this guy took something he loved, ripped his head off, said, "Do something about it." And he whooped his ass, and he never was the same after that moment, you know? So, and again, I want to reiterate, just because your kid's getting bullied, that doesn't mean he has to become a fighter. But I'm saying you can turn this pain into a million different avenues, and your kid will not be a pushover. Get him in the gym, get him wrestling, get him doing jiu-jitsu, get him boxing, you know, get him doing some type of martial arts competition where he has to fight other kids his age and size to where he gets comfortable in combat and competition. You know, don't give him no soft ass life. And that's the best thing you could do, you know. And he's going to be a fully capable adult or fully capable kid able to defend himself and fully confident. Learn how to fight.